Imagine a Porsche that looks nothing like a Porsche. It has none of the signature round headlights, none of the sloping roofline, and none of the silhouette that today even someone with no interest in cars would instantly recognize. Instead, standing before you is an incredibly low, razor-sharp wedge that looks more like a spaceship than an automobile. The windshield is almost a continuation of the hood. The body is made entirely of perfectly straight lines, and instead of conventional doors, the car opens like a futuristic machine straight out of a science fiction movie. Most astonishing of all, this extraordinary vehicle was created as early as 1970. It was called the Porsche Tapiro, and although only a single example was ever built, its influence on the automotive world proved enormous. It was the car that launched the wedge-shaped supercar trend that would dominate the entire 1970s and 1980s. Without the Tapiro, cars such as the BMW M1, Lotus Esprit, DeLorean DMC-12, Maserati Boomerang, and many other legends designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro would probably have looked very different. Even more remarkably, the story of this car ends in what can only be described as a cinematic tragedy. Some claim it was destroyed by a bomb during a workers' protest, while others insist it burned to the ground after a devastating road accident. Only one fact is beyond dispute. The only Porsche Tapiro ever built still exists today, but it no longer resembles the breathtaking concept car that once dazzled visitors at international motor shows. In place of its gleaming bodywork remains only a charred shell that has become the symbol of one of the most extraordinary, and at the same time, one of the most tragic, chapters in automotive history. The story of the Porsche Tapiro begins with a man whose influence on the automotive industry is almost impossible to overstate. Giorgetto Giugiaro was already recognized as one of the world's most talented automobile designers. He had previously worked for Bertone and Ghia, where he created numerous highly successful designs. But by the end of the 1960s, he decided to establish his own design studio, Italdesign. The young company needed a car that would demonstrate its capabilities to the world and serve as its ultimate calling card. At that time, nearly every manufacturer dreamed of unveiling futuristic concept cars that would attract enormous crowds at international motor shows. Porsche also wanted to prove that it was capable of stepping beyond its traditionally conservative design philosophy. The foundation for the new project became the Porsche 914-6, a model developed jointly with Volkswagen. It featured a mid-mounted flat-six engine, rear-wheel drive, and an advanced chassis layout that made it an ideal platform for an experimental concept. Giugiaro, however, retained little more than the floor pan and mechanical components from the donor car. Everything else was designed completely from scratch. The final result was so radical that virtually nobody could recognize any resemblance between the modest Porsche 914 and the futuristic Tapiro. Years later, Giugiaro repeatedly admitted that it remained one of his favorite projects because it allowed him to completely free his imagination and create a car unlike anything that had ever appeared on the road before. The Porsche Tapiro made its debut at the Turin Motor Show in 1970, and it instantly became one of the greatest sensations of the entire exhibition. At the time, the automotive world was slowly moving away from the flowing, rounded body shapes that had defined the 1950s and 1960s. Designers were beginning to experiment with sharp lines, geometric forms, and extremely low silhouettes. The Tapiro, however, went a step further than all of its rivals. The car stood only about 1 meter and 11 centimeters tall, making it appear as though it were almost glued to the pavement. It measured approximately 4 meters and 6 centimeters in length, and about 1 meter and 76 centimeters in width. Its most distinctive feature was undoubtedly its perfectly wedge-shaped profile. The front hood flowed almost seamlessly into the sharply raked windshield, while the roofline dropped just as dramatically toward the rear. The car looked more like a jet aircraft than a traditional Porsche. Giugiaro referred to this design philosophy as wedge design. Interestingly, many automotive historians consider the Tapiro to be the very first car to fully define this styling language. Over the following years, similar proportions began appearing almost everywhere. Cars such as the Lamborghini Countach, Lotus Esprit, Maserati Boomerang, BMW M1, and DeLorean DMC-12 all embraced the same design philosophy. It is therefore fair to say that the Tapiro not only amazed visitors in Turin, but also established the styling direction that would define supercars for many years to come. One of the most remarkable features of the Porsche Tapiro was its doors and body panels. At a time when nearly every automobile featured conventional side-opening doors, Giorgetto Giugiaro chose to create something that had rarely been seen before. Both the passenger doors and the covers over the engine compartment and rear luggage area lifted upward, like gull wings. Even standing still, the car looked astonishingly futuristic. To make such an unusual design possible, engineers developed a special cross-shaped steel structure. Its longitudinal section served as the mounting point for the hinges of both the doors and the rear panels, while the transverse section doubled as a rollover protection bar designed to safeguard the occupants in the event of an accident. It was an exceptionally advanced solution for the early 1970s. The front of the car was just as innovative. The headlights were hidden beneath distinctive square covers, allowing the nose to remain perfectly smooth and uninterrupted. At the time, concealed headlights were associated only with the most exotic high-performance sports cars. It is also worth emphasizing that the Tapiro was never intended to be merely an eye-catching showpiece built solely for exhibition purposes. From the very beginning, it was designed as a fully functional road-going automobile. Every technical solution was meant to work in the real world, not simply impress visitors at auto shows. That is precisely why the Tapiro is still regarded today as one of the most advanced concept cars of its era, a vehicle that was ahead of its competitors, not only in appearance, but also in the way it reimagined the very architecture of the automobile. Beneath the futuristic bodywork of the Porsche Tapiro lay mechanical components based on the proven Porsche 914-6, although they were significantly modified. Mounted behind the driver was an air-cooled flat-six engine with a displacement of 2.4 liters. This was not the standard power plant found in the production 914, however. The engineers increased its output to approximately 220 horsepower, produced at around 7,800 revolutions per minute. For the early 1970s, these figures were extremely impressive, delivering nearly twice the power of the standard Porsche 914-6. Naturally, power was sent to the rear wheels, while the mid-engine layout provided excellent weight distribution and outstanding handling characteristics. According to the original specifications, the Tapiro was capable of reaching approximately 240 kilometers per hour, while some sources claim a top speed closer to 245 kilometers per hour. That meant its performance was fully capable of competing with Europe's finest supercars of the era. The suspension was also inherited from Porsche, featuring fully independent suspension on all four wheels, ensuring remarkably advanced road manners. Unlike many spectacular concept cars displayed at motor shows, the Tapiro was fully functional. It could actually be driven on public roads and deliver performance worthy of a true exotic sports car. It was therefore much more than a styling exercise for idle design. It was a genuine supercar prototype that demonstrated how radically futuristic design could coexist with real-world performance. Although the Porsche Tapiro was created as a concept car, the possibility of putting it into production was considered from the very beginning. This was one of the key differences between the Tapiro and many of the futuristic show cars of its era. Most concept cars of the time were little more than spectacular sculptures made from fiberglass or clay, intended solely to attract attention at auto shows and hint at future styling trends. The Tapiro was different. Giorgetto Giugiaro designed it as a car that could genuinely be driven on public roads. Its body structure, component layout, interior ergonomics, and engineering solutions were all developed with real-world usability in mind. Idle design itself emphasized that its extreme styling did not rule out the possibility of mass production. Of course, bringing such a bold design to the marketplace would have required significant compromises and enormous financial investment. But from a technical standpoint, it was entirely achievable. That was precisely why the Tapiro created such a sensation when it debuted. The public was not looking at an unrealistic designer's fantasy. They were seeing a fully operational automobile that could actually have appeared on public roads. For Porsche, it also represented an intriguing experiment, demonstrating just how far the company could move away from its traditional styling language without abandoning its sporting identity. In the end, however, Porsche chose not to develop the project any further. The company remained faithful to its own design philosophy, while the Tapiro remained a unique, one-of-a-kind creation built to showcase the capabilities of idle design and the extraordinary talent of Giorgetto Giugiaro. Ironically, that very decision made the car even more special. It never received a second prototype, nor did it ever evolve into a production model, leaving the original Tapiro as one of the rarest and most influential concept cars ever created. After the Turin Motor Show, the Porsche Tapiro did not immediately disappear into a museum collection. Quite the opposite. It began touring some of the world's most prestigious automotive exhibitions. In 1971, it was displayed at the renowned Los Angeles Imported Automobile and Sports Car Show, where it once again attracted enormous attention. To American audiences, the Tapiro looked like a visitor from the future. Its razor-sharp lines, wedge-shaped silhouette, and extraordinary gull-wing doors made it stand out even among the most exotic Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Maseratis of the day. Once its exhibition career came to an end, Idle Design decided to sell the one and only prototype to a private buyer. The car was purchased by a Spanish businessman and collector who, to the surprise of many, did not lock it away in a private garage as a museum piece. Instead, he used the Tapiro almost like an ordinary road car. It was an astonishing sight. One of the world's most futuristic concept cars could actually be seen driving through the streets of Spain alongside everyday traffic. In doing so, the Tapiro proved that it was far more than a spectacular sculpture on wheels. It was a fully functional automobile, capable of operating in normal road conditions. Unfortunately, this chapter of its story eventually led to one of the greatest mysteries in the history of concept cars. Several different versions of what happened next exist, but they all end the same way, with the complete destruction of the only Porsche Tapiro ever built. The most widely accepted version of the story claims that the Porsche Tapiro became the victim of a bombing. According to this account, the owner was a Spanish industrialist whose factories had become the target of labor protests. During one of the strikes, a bomb was allegedly planted beneath the car. The explosion triggered a devastating fire that almost completely destroyed the unique prototype. Other sources tell a far less dramatic story. According to those accounts, the Tapiro was involved in a serious road accident before catching fire and burning almost entirely to the ground. To this day, no one has been able to conclusively determine which version is true. Idle Design officially states only that the car was destroyed in a fire following an accident. Yet the legend of the bombing has taken on a life of its own and continues to be repeated by automotive enthusiasts around the world. Regardless of what actually happened, the outcome was exactly the same. The only Porsche Tapiro ever built was almost completely destroyed by fire. Its bodywork, interior, and most of its equipment were lost, while only the structural framework and some mechanical components survived. The burned remains were later repurchased by Giorgetto Giugiaro and Idle Design, then transported back to Italy. Interestingly, despite its enormous historical significance, the decision was made never to restore the car. Instead, it was preserved exactly as it returned after the tragedy. Today, the charred remains of the Tapiro are housed in the Idle Design collection, serving as a powerful reminder of one of the most extraordinary concept cars ever created. Although only one Porsche Tapiro was ever built, its influence on automotive design proved to be enormously disproportionate to its production numbers. Many automotive historians believe that this very project marked the beginning of the era of wedge-shaped supercars. Before the Tapiro, sports cars had certainly become lower and more aerodynamic, but soft, flowing lines still dominated automotive styling. Giorgetto Giugiaro completely broke away from that philosophy. The Tapiro was composed almost entirely of flat surfaces, sharp edges, and crisp geometric lines. Its silhouette resembled a wedge slicing through the air. This new design language quickly became fashionable. Just a few years later, Giugiaro expanded the concept with projects such as the Maserati Boomerang, Lotus Esprit, and BMW M1. The influence can also be clearly seen in the DeLorean DMC-12, whose sharp body lines and gull-wing doors remain among the most recognizable symbols of 1980s automotive design. Even the Lamborghini Countach, designed by Marcello Gandini, perfectly reflected the wedge-shaped trend that the Tapiro had helped to establish. Interestingly, Giugiaro himself repeatedly described the Tapiro as one of his favorite creations because it allowed him, for the very first time, to completely abandon traditional automotive proportions and create something that truly looked like a vehicle from the future. It is difficult to name another concept car that, despite existing in only a single example, left such a profound mark on the styling of an entire decade. What truly sets the Porsche Tapiro apart from most concept cars of its era is the fact that it was never intended to be nothing more than an extravagant designer's fantasy. Many prototypes displayed at motor shows featured unrealistic proportions, non-functional interiors, or engineering solutions that could never have been adapted for real roads. The Tapiro was conceived differently from the very beginning. Giorgetto Giugiaro wanted to prove that even the most futuristic styling could be combined with genuine functionality. The car featured a complete interior, a fully operational powertrain, working suspension, and a cockpit designed for everyday driving. The driver sat extremely low, almost between the front and rear axles, creating a true sports car driving position and providing exceptional feedback from the chassis. The enormous glass area delivered outstanding visibility, despite the remarkably low roofline. Its dramatically raked windshield blended almost seamlessly into the hood, making the car appear astonishingly modern, even by today's standards. Aerodynamics also played a major role in the design. The sharp edges were not merely styling features. They were intended to help manage airflow around the body. Today we know that some of these solutions were more visually dramatic than aerodynamically effective, but in 1970, the Tapiro was years ahead of its time. That is precisely why many automotive designers still consider it one of the most important concept cars ever created. How many Porsche Tapiros were ever built? The answer is remarkably simple. Only one. It was the only prototype ever constructed by Edeldesign on the Porsche 914-6 platform, and it never progressed to mass production or even to a second development prototype. Ironically, it is precisely this uniqueness that gives the Tapiro such a special place in automotive history today. Most concept cars of that era were either scrapped or dismantled once they had completed their exhibition tours. At the time, very few manufacturers saw any reason to preserve prototypes as historical artifacts. The Tapiro was more fortunate than most. Although it was almost completely destroyed by fire, its remains survived to the present day. Rather than rebuilding the car, Edeldesign chose to preserve the burned shell as an authentic piece of automotive history. Visitors to the Edeldesign Museum can still see the charred bodywork, which continues to reveal the extraordinary proportions and bold styling originally created by Giorgetto Giugiaro. It is a rather unusual approach. Most manufacturers would likely have restored such an important vehicle to its original condition. Edeldesign believed that the scars left by the fire had become an inseparable part of the Tapiro's story. As a result, the only surviving example remains not only a design icon, but also one of the most remarkable automotive exhibits anywhere in the world. Its historical significance comes not only from its appearance, but also from the extraordinary story that ended in such dramatic circumstances. Had the Porsche Tapiro survived to the present day in perfect condition, it would almost certainly rank among the most valuable concept cars in the world. Estimating its value, however, is practically impossible, because the only example has never appeared at public auction and is unlikely to ever be offered for sale. For comparison, unique prototypes designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro, Bertone, or Pininfarina regularly achieve prices measured in many millions of dollars. Had the Tapiro remained in factory condition, experts estimate that it could easily be worth well over $10 million today. After all, it is the only surviving example of the car that introduced one of the most influential design movements in automotive history. What makes the story even more fascinating is that, despite surviving only as a burned shell, its historical importance remains immense. For museums and collectors of unique prototypes, a car's significance is determined by far more than its physical condition. Its story, its influence on automotive development, and its absolute uniqueness are what truly matter. By those standards, the Tapiro belongs among the world's greatest automotive treasures. It is far more than a rare Porsche or a one-of-one prototype. It is a physical reminder of the moment when automotive design dared to completely reinvent itself. Even in its charred state, it remains an irreplaceable artifact, marking the birth of the wedge-shaped styling language that would dominate the world of supercars for the next decade and beyond. So why is the Porsche Tapiro considered such an automotive icon when it never entered production and only a single example was ever built? The answer lies in its influence on the future. Very few concept cars have changed the way designers around the world thought about automobiles as profoundly as the Tapiro did. It proved that a supercar no longer had to resemble a traditional Grand Tourer with a long hood and flowing, rounded fenders. Instead, it could take the form of a low, geometric wedge, with every line shaped by modern thinking and aerodynamic efficiency. Giorgetto Giugiaro created a design that was years ahead of its time. Just look at the cars that appeared throughout the following decade, and its influence becomes impossible to ignore. The BMW M1, Lotus Esprit, DeLorean DMC-12, Maserati Boomerang, and even many later Lamborghinis all embraced a similar design language. Their sharp edges, flat body surfaces, extremely low roof lines, and wedge-shaped proportions became defining characteristics of the 1970s and 1980s. More importantly, the Tapiro demonstrated that a concept car could be both a work of art and a fully functional road-going automobile. It was never intended to be nothing more than a sculpture displayed under bright lights at a motor show. It could actually be driven, something that was exceptionally rare for concept cars of that era. That unique combination of daring styling, genuine usability, and enormous influence on automotive design is why the Porsche Tapiro continues to be recognized as one of the most important concept cars of the 20th century. The story of the Porsche Tapiro proves that the greatest legends in automotive history are not always born on production lines. Sometimes, a single automobile is enough to permanently change the way cars are designed. That is exactly what happened here. The Tapiro began as the bold vision of the young Ital-Design studio, captivated audiences at international motor shows, demonstrated that futuristic styling could coexist with real-world functionality, and then disappeared under tragic circumstances, leaving behind more questions than answers. Only one example was ever built, and after the fire, it was never restored. Yet its importance to automotive history remains enormous. It was the first car to fully realize the concept of the wedge-shaped supercar, a design philosophy that would dominate the creations of the greatest Italian and European manufacturers throughout the following years. The Tapiro inspired an entire generation of designers and proved that an automobile could simultaneously be a work of art, an engineering experiment, and a fully operational road car. Today, the charred remains of that one and only prototype rest within the Idle Design collection as a silent witness to one of the most extraordinary stories in automotive history. Ironically, it is precisely that burned shell that has made the legend of the Tapiro even more powerful. Had the car survived in perfect condition, it might have become just another beautiful concept, preserved in a museum. Instead, its dramatic fate transformed it into a symbol of bold creativity, the limitless imagination of Giorgetto Giugiaro, and an era when concept cars truly had the power to shape the future of the automobile. Today, the Porsche Tapiro is no longer simply a forgotten concept from 1970. It stands as one of the most important milestones in the history of automotive design.